Sylvie. She lives multiple lives, and I'm guessing that Leona has too because she can write so well about so many things. She writes beautifully and convincingly about the natural world, about women's relationships, sex, and love, also about life in a mechanic shop, the behind the scenes interactions at a beauty contest, the science of hearing aids, the field work done by climate scientists. I could go on and on. Leona, I truly feel we are richer for your experience and the thoughtful way that you explore our varied and diverse world in your fiction. I'm honored to present this book and to introduce and welcome Leona Theis.
There we go. I was on mute. Sorry about that. Thank you so much. Can you hear me now? Okay. Thank you so much, Debbie, for those very kind words about the work. And thank you for the experience of doing the editing work with me, your keen insights and your keen eye, and also your patience. For example, when I came to you, when we had both all but signed off on the book as it was, and were ready to send it to the next stage of the publishing process, and I came to you and said, I've got another idea, and it involves taking another deep dive into the manuscript and maybe some major renovations and revisions. And you were so patient and you said, go ahead, see what you come up with. I'll read whatever you come up with. So thank you for that wonderful experience. You were a joy to work with. And thank you to Freehand Books for such a positive publishing experience. I know Kelsey Attar is here behind the scenes, and she's responsible for much of that positive experience. I also want to thank the three authors who provided commentary for the back cover of the book. Nino Ricci, Salima Nawaz, and Judy Paul. So generous of you. Thank you so much for doing that. And thank you all who are tuning in to spend this time with me to celebrate the launch of my new novel, If Sylvie Had 9 Lives. I don't know where you can see it, but thank you so much for taking the time. I would like nothing better than to be in the same room with all of you right now, where we could see each other's faces and interact more closely with each other, and maybe look forward to refreshments afterward. As it is, we're making the most of the format that we do have. And one of the great things about that is it means that friends and family who are not geographically close to Saskatchewan can be here to join us. So that's a great thing. I'm happy to be here also with Kate O'Gorman. Thank you for joining us. I'll be in conversation with Kate later. I first met Kate when I was invited to lead a workshop for the writing group that she's a member of, and I was so impressed with how finely tuned her writing is. She's published in magazines like Qwerty and Untethered, and I understand there's a collection of linked short stories that's taking shape. So I look forward to conversation with you. This launch will take the form of 3 very short readings from 3 different of Sylvie's 9 lives, and we'll intersperse those short readings with conversation between Kate and myself. I understand you have some questions, Kate. And then, as Rachel said, you can add some questions to the Q&A tab. Just type something in if you think of something while I'm reading or while we're talking. And we'll try to get to some of those questions later. So I've said I would do 3 short readings, but if the conversation gets going and we don't have time, then we'll do 2 readings and have more conversation. Before I do the first of those readings, we're going to introduce the book by taking a look at this lively, lovely gem of a trailer that Freehand had produced for the book. So Kelsey, is that ready to go right now? Thanks for that. I just love that. That's the work of animation wizard Anna Boyer, and I'm so happy with it. It gives you a little bit of a visual introduction, and as you can see, this is a book that asks, what if? So Sylvie, in fact, does have 9 lives. You can see as little rivers on the cover and inside with maps that I'll show you later. It asks, what would my life be like if I had done this instead of that? And it asks that question over and over. And from the time we meet Sylvie at age 19 in 1974, her life takes 9 very different paths until the time we leave her at the age 59 in 2014. So her life takes 9 very different directions, depending on choices she made, whether she made those choices consciously or unconsciously. And in some cases, depending on circumstances that were nothing she could control, but that affected her life. The book spans 40 years from age 19 to age 59. And each time we meet a new version of Sylvie in a different part of the book. She's 5 years older than the Sylvie we were just with in the earlier chapter or story. So she's 5 years older in every segment and living an entirely different life. She is a character who is far from perfect. She makes some bad decisions along the way. And in fact, you might finish reading the book and conclude that I've not only given her 9 lives, but I've given her 9 chances to make different mistakes. I'm going to start the very first short reading from the very beginning of the book, where we meet Sylvie in 1974. She's living in Saskatoon. She's a day and a half from marrying a man called Jack. So we'll move into that, but just a couple of things before I start to read. If you're a person who likes to follow along with the book in hand as I read, please don't even try to do that, because in the hopes of making these readings short and to get from A to B, I've actually edited them quite heavily. So there's no chance that you'll follow along if you've got the book in front of you. The other thing I want to say is that in order to make things a little more fun and interesting, I've been collecting props that go along with whichever of Sylvie's lives I'm reading about. And so these are props from 1974. And if you don't recognize them, which many of you won't, these are stubby beer bottles from the 70s. And then the blue plastic flowers, well, you'll see as I read the story. Also, I should say that the props change with each story that I'm reading from. So once in a while, you'll see the hands of the friendly giant come in to remove the props from one story and add in the props for the next story. So, and if you don't recognize the reference to the friendly giant, then you're maybe not quite as old as Sylvie. So this is from the very beginning of the book, where we meet Sylvie at age 19, living in Saskatoon. It's called High Beams. 2 nights before the date printed in silver italic on her wedding invitations, Eric called. The guy she'd ridden with through all those dust-hung after darks on country gravel roads in his mum's long Meteor, boat-like in the night. He was on his way through the city, he said. They should have a drink. In her right hand, Sylvie held the clunky weight of the phone receiver, and in her left, she held a half-made wedding flower. Begin by stacking half a dozen squares of colored see-through plastic. Pleat the stack according in style, then bind it at the middle. Spread each side into a fan. Fluff. Repeat 4 dozen times. Get married. Hang up the phone, said Margot. Pay some attention already. She took the flower from Sylvie's hand and fluffed the unfinished side and handed it back. Among the rules for nuptials in 1974, Decorate the wedding car with flowers the color of the bridesmaids' dresses. Sylvie angled the receiver away from her mouth. I am paying attention. Of course you are. It's just not all that obvious. Sylvie held the flower to her nose as if she expected perfume. Somewhere in this city was Eric, also with a receiver in his hand and a cord leading away from it. Tug. She looked out the high, small window. Living in a basement suite, you see the lowest quarter of anyone walking around to the back door at the head of the stairs. She knew her friends by their legs, their shoes, the size of their feet. Here came Cynthia's sneakered feet now, cousin Cynthia, arriving to help with the flowers. Things get away on you. The better part of a year goes by. Next thing you know, your dad's booked the United Church back home, and your aunts have made arrangements for the midnight lunch. Assorted cold cuts and homemade buns and Uncle Davis's special pepper pickles. Yes, let's, Sylvie said into the phone. Good, said Eric. I'll meet you at that club. What is it, the Yips? Sure. Sylvie thought how he sounded like a hick, referring to Yips as the Yips. She hung up and said, let's wrap this up, Margot. I'm going out. Without Jack? Without Jack. Who then? Not your beeswax. She went up to meet Cynthia. Thanks for coming, she said, but it turns out this isn't a good night for making flowers after all. But Sylvie, you only have tonight and tomorrow, and then that's it. Yes, Sylvie thought, that's true. They used to drive at night, she and Eric, along the back roads near Ripley, looking for parked couples. Once they found a vehicle, they'd train their high beams on the rear window for a bit, then back up, turn around, and take off to find another car, laughing to think of Paul or Stuart bare-assed in the back, and Shelley or Beth struggling to do up her blouse, the buttons so big, and the buttonholes so small, and the fingers so suddenly fat. Sylvie and Eric called their game birth control. Let's go do some birth control tonight. Let's go do some backseat interruptus in Ripley, Saskatchewan, playground of the prairies. In those days, Sylvia's grandma Fletcher had in her living room a green satin cushion that dated from the 40s. It was silk screened with the playground of the prairies slogan and pictures of babes water skiing and men golfing and fishing. In the real life Ripley, there was no lake where a person could launch a boat or water ski. There was no fishing hole, no river. These days, Grandma Fletcher's satin cushion sat on the couch in Sylvie and Jack's basement suite, a slippery joke. The day after tomorrow, Sylvie and Jack would get up and have breakfast, then take their finery, sheathed in plastic bags, 4 hours out to Ripley, where they would tape the flowers to the Dodge and have the ceremony. Tonight, the boys had already come to pick up Jack, took him out to party. The girls had given Sylvie a bridal shower last Thursday, where they made her wear a tin pie plate with an orange pot scrubber stuck over to one side, supposed to look like a bow on a bonnet. They played parlor games. Margot won a Tupperware citrus peeler for having in her purse the item voted most unlikely to be found in a purse, specifically a moo cow creamer from the truck stop south of the city on number 11. Tea and instant coffee and Tang had been the beverages on offer. So it was no wonder the thought that came to Sylvie's mind now was, you have to make your own fun. So I'll stop there. This is the point at which Sylvie's lives diverge in 9 different directions. Kate?
Thank you so much for that reading, Leona. That was that first kind of echo Deborah's comments about that first short story that prefaces the rest of the book. It's a stunning example of a well-crafted short story. And when I first read it, I just kind of tucked in with my cozy blanket and my cup of tea, and I thought, oh, okay, here we go. This is going to be good. and it really was. I mean, the whole collection, the whole book was just such a joy to read. So
Well, thank you so much, Kate. Thank you.
So if Sylvie had 9 lives, it is a collection of linked short stories or a novel in stories. Um, and it follows, in a line of great linked short story collections. Carrie Ann Leung's "That Time I Loved You" kind of comes to mind, and which I think is going to be made into a CBC miniseries.
I believe so, yeah.
Not sure if it's with CBC, but yeah, so fingers crossed for Sylvie. And you've also already been compared, or this book rather has been compared to Caroline Adderson's work, Ellen in Pieces. So good company to be in. As I was reading, it became apparent to me that there are a couple of ways to read this book, to approach this book. And you mentioned already the mapping that's included through the cover as well, and the threads and the streams. And so the first way was how I approached it, which was with a strict adherence to how each story follows a particular lifeline. I can't say I'm an advocate for marking books, but I can see the temptation maybe to look at each map before each story or a couple of stories and kind of say, okay, where are we now? Who is she married to? Who are her children? What's her occupation now? Where is she in reference to previous alternative lives? So being very kind of a close read to the mapping that you include. And the other way that I was also tempted to do, and I think I will do as I read this book a second time, is just to let the stories wash over you, which is partly why I love linked short story collections. I mean, there's a joy in reading multiple short stories and starting to see how they weave together, and those moments that authors put in to kind of tickle the reader almost, right, as reminiscence and memories come back, and images that are returned in story to story. So just allowing all of that nuance and all of those wonderful little gems to just kind of wash over you as you read it. So I'm wondering, Leona, how important was the mapping to you in your writing process, and how do you hope readers will approach this book?
Okay, well, thank you for that question and those comments, Kate. You're right, it is a novel in stories, and it can be read. This is something Debbie and I talked to when we talked about how to shape the book. It can be read as each story a separate work in its own right. And I worked very hard to make each story self-contained, so that if a person picked up the book and read only one story, it would be a complete tale in itself. At the same time, I think of it as a novel in stories because there are some arcs or some stories that have to do with Sylvie's childhood that are revealed gradually through the course of the book. But each of those reveals or details as they come along in the course of the book still sits comfortably, I think, within that story. You don't need to have read the entire book to that point to understand those parts. I don't want people to feel like they're engaged in too much of a puzzle when they read the book. So I wanted people to be able to just read each story as it came and not worry about where it fit. But I also wanted to make room for readers who did want to do that work. And that's, I don't know where to put this. I'll just put it in front of my face for a second. I don't know if it's well lit or too well lit, but that's an example of one of the maps that the designer came up with to help people find their way through Sylvie's lives. And those occur right before each segment where we meet a new Sylvie. And some people have a lot of fun doing that. But some people, I know, I've had friends tell me that they read the book and they just let each story, as you said, wash over them. And then once they were finished the book, they had a lot of fun flipping back and looking at maps and trying to find those hidden moments that are laid in throughout the book that show exactly where one life took off and went left instead of right. So if a person did want to do that kind of puzzle solving and reliving, they could go back and find those. And it was very important to me. I had all kinds of charts and vital statistics documents on my computer and on my wall as I was writing to help me keep track, because some things are constant from one life to the next. Ages of children and deaths of people. And so for me to keep track was quite a challenge. So it was very important for me to have all that exactly right. And you wouldn't believe how late in the editing process I was finding errors to do with that, but it was so important to me that the reader trust, even if they weren't the kind of person who wanted to go back and do that puzzle solving, that they could trust me that I got it right. So
when in the process of writing, because I know that Sylvie as a character has been with you, I think that first story was published in 2014, correct?
that could be, yeah.
Okay, I think I saw that. But she's been with you for a while. I'm wondering, this idea of a linked collection, or just even this idea, Bernadette Wagner in the comments here, I'm already seeing, has asked, how on earth did you come up with the premise for this book? Was this structure, did it grow organically, or did you kind of have this awakening and say, aha, this is something I can work on?
Both. And there are two things I'll say about that. Early on, I was working on a different novel, which right now is sitting in a drawer waiting for me to get back to it. But I'm always working on more than one thing at once. So while I was writing a different novel, I was also writing short stories the odd time as a break from novel writing, or when I would get an idea. And I had two short stories about a character, and one seemed like a variation on that character. And I happened to have the good fortune to have my friend David Carpenter read those two stories. And I said to him, they're about the same woman. And one was Sylvie when she was 19, and one was Sylvie in her mid 40s, maybe. And he read them and he gave me great feedback on the stories. And he said, I can see how they're about a similar woman, but I don't see how they're about the same woman. And so I put that thought away, and I had other stories that I was working on that I thought, well, they could be about this woman too, but not quite. And so one day I was on a trip to Toronto, and I had a layover in Winnipeg Airport. I always seem to get a layover in Winnipeg Airport. And a lot of people don't like layovers, but I love them. They're that kind of free time, like it's you're not responsible for anything. You can sit and just daydream. And I was having a cup of coffee in Winnipeg Airport, and my mind was totally relaxed. And it was that kind of alpha wave activity where maybe it's your subconscious has taken over. I wasn't really thinking about anything. And the thought just came to me. I just thought, I could write a story just once. I could write a whole book where I don't limit my character to one life. Because every time as a writer, you make a choice on behalf of your character. You send her left instead of right, then you're closing off a whole lot of possibilities and plot lines. And I just kind of missed those. And so I thought, because I can, I'm going to give my character more than one chance. I'm going to, in fact, give her 9.
And it's
so
just
those two things.
It's a brilliant premise. And I think it certainly invited me into that same what if, right? After reading, and while I'm reading, I found myself saying, yeah, what if I had made another choice when I was 19? What if I had not gone to university or not married this particular person? Or, it weaves. And it's a very subtle thing, I think, that you do. And it's a testament to the mastery of your craft, how you invite the reader then to start to reflect, at least it was in my case, to reflect on how I could relate and kind of commiserate with Sylvie a little bit.
Well, that's great to hear. And I actually have talked to so many readers already who say they could sit down and make their own maps. And I could make a map of at least 9 Leonas in different directions too.
Yeah.
So that's great to hear that makes people think about that. Should we move on to the next?
Please, yes, absolutely.
Short reading. Okay, so that first excerpt was from the very beginning of the book. We're moving on to 2004, when Sylvie is 49 years old, and in quite a departure from some of the lives that have gone before. In this life, she is a university professor, and I'll just quickly hold up this map. I don't know how the light is. So we're up here in 2004, and you can see that some of her other lives have taken quite a different path. But here we are in 2004, and as unlikely as it might seem, she is a university professor. This story is called Nikia, which is a word from ancient Greek, and it refers to a practice of calling up ghosts in order to ask them about the future. And typically pilgrims in ancient Greece who would go to consult with ghosts would, as a preliminary, they would have to often fast for days and also take certain foods like, say, lupin seeds that would act as hallucinogens. So you can imagine that this was a pretty clever ploy on the part of the priests that made people think that they really were talking to people who had crossed the river Styx. So this is called Nikia, and I'll just read a short beginning. And once again, it's been heavily edited, so don't try to follow along. Outside the gates of hell, Sylvie bought a swingy green beach dress with swirls of tiny silver beads, a fling of bling to match her mood. 2 full days of skipping out in northern Greece. Yesterday, she'd been one of 3 academics on a panel of mentors sharing mid-career wisdom with scholars so fresh you could make a salad of them and watch to see who would wilt when the vinegar rained down. Day after tomorrow, she would lecture on the use of the mask in classical theater, but these 2 days between were all about holiday, and Will was here. Where there's a will, he'd said yesterday when she asked if they might drive off in his little red rental. As legend had it, the journeys of both Odysseus and Pindar had brought them here to the Necromanteon to consult the oracle of the dead. Glory days. Of late, the site was apparently little visited, and Sylvie and Will had seen only one other seeker as they wandered between the massive cyclopean walls, wondering at the puzzle of polygon masonry. In a cavern below ground, where twice Will knocked his head on the low arches, Sylvie whispered, "Anyone home?" And Will whispered, "Not on your life." They climbed back up the steep iron stairs into sunlight and went down the slope to the parking lot below the ruins, where a lone outpost of enterprise shimmered in the heat. A thatch roof stall where beach dresses hung limp on plastic hangers. T-shirts, too, in 4 colors with flames rising from block letters. I have been to the gates of hell. A shame, such pandering. Don't blame the vendor, Will said. Sunlight silvered his curls, what was left of them. He has to buy groceries too. He lifted his sunglasses for a moment, the watered blue of his eyes familiar from all those years ago and lovely to see. The rest of his face was, well, years older and somehow less than itself. Blame the people who buy that shit. He gestured toward the rack where Sylvie had found her dress. His sunglasses settled back into place. She stuck her tongue out at him, feeling like a teenager. Uncertainty, ache, squirming joy. She folded the bead-spangled dress, wrapped it around the brown ceramic sheep, fragile, the size of her closed fist, that she'd carried across 2 continents and an ocean, and stowed the bundle in her shoulder bag. She'd meant to sit on the hillside near the ruins, alone and quiet, and break the sheep open, leave the shining fragments in the grass, an offering to the oracle in exchange for guidance. That had been her plan when she packed her shoulder bag in Vancouver, but this morning when she'd woken at Villa Stavros with Will in the next room, the urgency had ebbed. She knew now the answer to her question, had known since yesterday when he'd appeared looking up at her in the lecture hall, waiting for her to recognize him. The past made physical. They walked in the heat across the stony lot. Your little red Hyundai looks like a hard candy on wheels. Not an easy car to take seriously, but a good fit for the narrow roads. Once past the village, Will turned off the main road. Let's explore. I'll have to come back, Sylvie said. To Greece? To the gates of hell. In a drawstring pouch inside her carryall was a do-it-yourself ritual kit that, along with the ceramic sheep, would bide its time. 2 small stones that once in a while Sylvie heard tap against each other, a plastic bottle with a screw-top lid, and a bubble pack of gravel. A couple of tablets might be enough to get her half stone now that the strongest drink she did on a regular basis was Alberta rye. Will slowed and shifted for a sharp left. You told me not to call it the gates of hell. Cheapens it, didn't you say? As the car swung through the turn, Sylvie's head bumped the passenger window. Yikes, it's like a maze here. Anything could come around the curve. Oleander bloomed tall and pink and powdered along the roadside. Their wheels raised a silver dust to coat the spear-like leaves with yet another layer. Now a sharp right, and Sylvie's stomach swirled. Why do you need to come back? Will said. The same reason Odysseus came. The living ask for guidance from the dead. She thought he might smirk, but he nodded. Oh, look left, she said. A whitewashed box on spindly legs at the side of the road. A small blue dome of a roof with a cross atop, a tiny arched doorway, and a picture of a saint looking out. Pretty little shrine. Oh, God, said Will, somebody died right here. Or someone wants to thank a saint for saving them. Sylvie the mentor, say some other wise things. I'm not wise guy. I'm knowledgeable. Say some knowledge then. Some of your ancient Greek, what have you. I could use it. Okay, listen, she said. Tragedies. In classical tragedy, you never saw death on stage. Blood, death, mutilation, it all happened out of sight. Drama without drama. No. Oedipus stabs out his own eyes, and it happens off stage, but then here he comes wearing his gory mask. Blood running out the eye sockets. It's the result you have to deal with, which is so much more affecting than today's big screen violence. Well, say some character actually dies off stage then. How's the audience supposed to know? Hue and cry, wailing and gnashing of teeth among the loved ones. They rounded a shrubbery-obscured curve to see 2 cars coming at them side by side with not a meter between them. Sylvie landed her right foot hard against the mat. As she stomped her gross brake, Will tromped the gas. He made it barely to a break in the roadside bush and stopped there while the 2 cars blurred past. Sylvie and Will sat staring ahead, taming their trembles. Oleander was plastered flat against the glass on the passenger side like a painting in pink and green. Sylvie slid the window open and a fragrant branch of leaves and blossoms spilled in. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. Your descriptive imagery throughout the entire book is really phenomenal. Depictive. So something I thought we might chat about, I think is really kind of perfect for that reading, is a little bit about this theme that threads through every story in the book about injury. You have a number of themes that thread throughout the entire book. And of course, you already mentioned the most, the most prominent one, which is this push, pull, give and take between choices, the choices that Sylvie makes in her life versus happenstance, right? And just the deck that was dealt to her in any number of her lives. So there's that theme that goes back and forth. But then there's also this very interesting, strange theme. I don't know. I found, I mean, I picked up on it right away. I think all your readers will really notice it fairly quickly because it's so prevalent throughout all of the story. And that's this theme, this threading theme of physical pain or injury. So, I mean, it can be anything from what we just heard you read in terms of kind of a life and death situation where they pass a shrine to where somebody possibly died on the side of the road, to where they almost lose their own lives in a car accident, to something a little, more benign, where she's on the phone wrapping, the thread of the sofa around her finger and until the blood circulation gets cut off. She imagines, when she's at work as a bookbinder, what would it be like if I put my finger in the guillotine, and chopped off the tip along with the pages of the bookbinding machine. Or it can be the bruise on a hip. It can be the threat of drowning. And I could go on and on. It's literally in every story. And so I'm wondering if you can talk about this, speak to this a bit. Why this theme of injury and pain?
Okay, well, great question. Once again, I have two answers. One is, it takes a long time. You'll have to live with a novel for a long time. So you have to find ways to make it interesting to yourself. And if you bore yourself, then you certainly bore the readers. And if you keep yourself interested, you have a better chance of keeping readers interested. So I decided early on, as I was composing in the first place or editing stories, I wanted, and this is just a writer's trick to sort of juice things up a little bit. I decided that in every story, Sylvie had to engage in some sort of dangerous play.
So this was deliberate.
This was deliberate. It wasn't necessarily there in the first drafts of stories. And so maybe it was something I noticed as I was going, but it was very deliberate. And so then that became a part of Sylvia's personality. And it was a really interesting thing for me to explore on the page. And then as I was doing research for some of these stories, I did research into the classics in Greek drama and tragedy and philosophy. And a lot of that research has gone from my mind by now, for sure. But I did remember this, this quotation from Sophocles that desire is some combination of a ferocious, it's a combination of pleasure and pain. And this book is really, in a big way, it's about wanting, and it's about wanting too much sometimes. It's sort of insatiability, how we get ourselves in trouble with insatiability and we get the planet in trouble. And the Sophocles quote about desire is that it's a mixture of pleasure and pain. So I think it's something like a ferocious bite and at the same time a hot melting. And I think that Sylvie in her various lives is just having trouble figuring that out over and over and over.
Well, and
Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, yeah, I think so. It definitely fits her character. I mean, Sylvie she's incredibly relatable, but she's complicated. I mean, she's
yeah.
she breaks the rules. She's impulsive. So in a way, this sense of injury and risk taking really follows through, right? I mean, because it's almost woven into her DNA. You feel like, and it's interesting because you do say, at one point, most the choices she gets to make, she seems to keep choosing wrongly in some ways. I do want to give her some credit. She doesn't always, but there is a tendency that as a reader, I was saying, oh my goodness, there she goes again, right? She's constantly trying and striving, which is, I think, her admirable qualities, and that she wants the best. And she takes that leap of faith only to face plant often, time and time again.
It's true, that happens. And I'm hoping that, we talk about the difference between separate stories and a novel in stories. And I do hope that by the end, in some of her lives, in the later stories, she does at least grow up a little bit and start to sort of try to make better choices. Sometimes not necessarily for the best of reasons, but she does engage a little.
Absolutely, there's a progression, I think, as particularly as she gets older. And I'm wondering, in the story that, or in the section you just read, one of the quotes that Will says to her in the car is, you're sweet. You're sweeter than you used to be.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you do show this progression of her growing from this naive 19-year-old to, someone who's in a marriage that she's questioning, to various different versions of her life, but she does progressively become more mature. And I found it interesting that the stories in which there are children or grandchildren, Sylvie seems to rise to the occasion a little bit more. She takes on more responsibility. Some may say she's her best self in the stories in which children play a central role. Was that intentional on your part?
No, I don't think so. But one of the things that Debbie and I talked about during the editing process was making her really believable as a parent. And so I did take a deep emotional dive into those stories where she is a parent or a grandmother, and did some thinking about that. And I know that for me, being a parent has given me different priorities. Not that you need to have a child to have the right priorities, but for me, it was a big difference in my life. And so maybe that's why it translates to being a big difference in Sylvie's life.
Mm. I've got a question here from Donna, and she asks, is there any significance in the fact that Sylvie has 9 lives?
I think it's just the number from the saying about cats, and then, in one of the first stories, in the first life, I guess, that we're going through, she's playing with a cat, and she says, how many lives do you have, kitty? And do you make the same mistakes over and over? And how many lives does a cat have? Well, in the popular proverb, cat has 9 lives. But then when I got to mapping out the book, it was a manageable form to give her at first 3 main departures, and then from each of those departures have 3 more. So 3 times 3 is 9. And so it was just a nice manageable. I had to do everything I could to make the structure manageable. So that was one of the things I did that made it manageable. Excellent. Thanks for the question.
Excellent. We have another question, so 2 that are similar here. Says, how much of your own life is reflected in Sylvie's lives? And maybe as an extension of that, have you ever, and we maybe already mentioned this, but have you ever wished for several lives yourself?
I don't think I ever have wished for several lives. I'll start with that part first. I might have wished to live in a different city, or, I wonder about different courses my life might take. But, I've said elsewhere, I've got an imaginary version of myself that still works in the garment factory where I worked when I was 19. And she's now a supervisor, and I can describe her life probably in detail. But I don't think she wants to be me, and I really don't want to be her. And the main reason is that the people she loves are over there in her life, and the people I love are over here in my life. And so it's hard to wish for a different life when you're surrounded by the people who love you and who you love.
That's lovely.
I don't know if there were 2 parts to that question and I missed one. Oh, how much does Sylvie like me?
Yes.
It's no accident that Sylvie is 19 in 1974, and I was 2, and Sylvie was 59 in 2014, as I was. What that really means is that I know fairly well the times and the settings that I could put her in. And I had some, but not all of the jobs that she had. It meant that I could be authentic in writing about those things. If I had to pick a Sylvie that I would want to be, there isn't one. But when you're writing, what you do is you take one part of your experience or your mind. Sometimes some writers do, and I often do this, and you stretch that one piece as far as you can stretch it, and you see where it goes. And so yeah, I can't think of an example right now, but trying to imagine hurting yourself. No, that's a bad example because I don't imagine hurting myself. But gosh, I should know. It's my own book. Well, trying to imagine being a researcher in the mountains where I love to spend time. So I take that and I stretch it one direction. And so that's what I was mostly doing, taking something from my life or some temptation and stretching it.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, speaking of your imagination and stretching it, Ariel Gordon asks a question that I'm also incredibly curious about, and that's Sylvie's shoplifting. Yeah, so it's a classic risk-taking behavior, she says, but was it hard to write?
Was it hard to write? Well, I won't lie. I did have, like many teenagers, I did have a little experience with that myself, but just the kinds of things that teenagers get in a little trouble over. So, I won't say I've never shoplifted. A lot of people have. I've never shoplifted to the scale that Sylvie did, that got her into so much trouble in one of her lives. And so I really had to take a deep dive to imagine that. But part of that was just imagining want. I mean, I think human beings, we're kind of insatiable creatures, and it's got us into a lot of trouble. It's gotten our planet into a lot of trouble. And it's very human to want more sweets, more love, more lovers, more material goods, more clothing, more pairs of shoes. And so when I took that deeper dive into the Sylvie who had so much trouble with shoplifting, it was just kind of thinking about that kind of want. And how do you feel? How would you feel after you took something you really wanted? Would it just be hollow afterwards?
Mm-hmm.
So thank you, Ariel. It's nice to see you here.
Yeah. It makes me curious about, as I was reading the whole collection, her shoplifting, I think, spoke to a definite brokenness in her that, and I don't want to do any spoilers here, but it definitely speaks to a brokenness in her that is a common experience from 19 on through every life that she lives. And so I'm wondering, as I was reading the book, I wondered, is there a moral to Sylvie's lives? And what would you say it is, if there is one?
Okay. Well, I don't ever write with morals or lessons in mind. And I did want to try very hard not to punish any of the Sylvies in literary terms for any of their behavior. I just wanted to write about all the various Sylvies from a standing point of love and not judging her for any of her poor choices and poor actions. And so my goal really was just to portray, to really think about her in those different situations and just do as accurate a portrayal and as moving a portrayal as I could to help readers get inside Sylvie. And then I leave it to readers to draw whatever lessons or morals. If they're the kind of people who look for lessons or morals, I leave it to the readers to find those on their own.
Fair enough. Thank you. So as far as I think I can see, I see a couple more questions. And one it speaks a little bit to who inspires you as a writer. This person says she's also a fan of Kate Atkinson's work, for example, Life After Life, which I think, yeah, you can see parallels between Sylvie and Atkins' work. Would you be able to talk about the differences between your book and hers? She asks.
Well, I have a fairly easy answer to that, because when the review of Kate's book came out in the Globe and Mail, I was halfway through writing Sylvie, and I thought, oh God, I've been scooped.
Oh.
What am I going to do? Of course, it took me many more years, so that book has faded a little bit from people's memories, but
Yeah.
I quite intentionally did not read Kate Atkinson's book, or Jenny Erpenpeck's book, or big American writer whose name escapes me right now. I didn't read any of those Life After Life books because I wanted to be original, and I didn't want to have those influences in my mind. And now I'm quite eager to read them, now that I'm not trying to keep my own work separate. So I'm sorry I can't compare the two.
Mm. No problem. So, I mean, taking that a little further, though, did you have a particular writer or author in mind that inspired you, either in terms of the structure or with your own tone in your writing?
Well, I read very widely, and I'm sure all those voices influence the tone and my voice over time, but I'm not conscious of any of that. But one book that was a lodestar for me in terms of writing a linked collection was Elizabeth Strout's Olive Kittredge.
Oh, yeah.
And her idea of having us see Olive from different points of view was also very valuable. And I love the way she deals with interiors and emotion. And I've read that book over and over and over. I've studied that book. I love it.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, definitely kind of a big one in the canon for writers, right? To go back to time and time again. But you could say that about so many writers. I see one here from Caitlin Ward. And she says, this notion of desire and wanting is very interesting to her. Has parsing Sylvie's relationship with desire changed your own attitude or approach to desire in your own life?
It's maybe, thank you, Caitlin, for the question. It's maybe made me more aware of wishes and urges and how I act on them. It's maybe helped me. Well, I think we're all examining our own lives in terms of the climate crisis and environmental damage and how our own wants play into that. So that was something that I was just extremely conscious of all the way through writing the book.
And Colleen Wiseman, I hope I'm saying her name correctly. She's saying, we know that the process of writing a book from beginning, and we already talked about how that first story was published in 2014, and so Sylvie was likely with you even before that. And then the publishing process is quite a lengthy process as well. And you talked a little bit about that as we began with Deborah, about the back and forth that you both went through. And so Colleen is asking, was it difficult to say goodbye to Sylvie at the end of the book?
Well, she's still with me. No, I felt like I had done something complete, and that was partly because of this 3x3 format. And so it felt very contained. No, I wouldn't say it was difficult to say goodbye, but who knows, she might reemerge. I don't know.
Okay, excellent. Karen Melberg Schweier, again, I hope I'm saying her name correctly. She says, is there something about living here in Saskatoon that feeds your creativity and perspective? And what is it about the writing community here that you find helpful?
Oh, hi, Karen. Karen's also a writer. Well, especially when I was beginning to write, it was really wonderful to have such a supportive community of writers in Saskatoon and in Saskatchewan, and things like the Writers Guild that was offering workshops and just friendly, supportive people, and Sage Hill Writing Experience, which is a national and sometimes international program, but is located here. And I've been, I think, 4 times. And that's been very nurturing. I went with my manuscript for Sylvie and worked with Nina Ricci at Sage Hill, that was a wonderful experience. So inspiring, anything inspiring, especially about Saskatchewan. I think, you know, a lot of writers need to write things that are located where they are, where they live, and where they've spent their formative years. And so for me, I spent my formative years here, and that's been a big part of my writing, especially my first book.
Yeah. Wonderful.
I see that time is gone on us, and we won't get to the final story, but I will just say that you'll have to read the book to understand what the ski gear and the first aid kit and the little bottle of Grand Marnier is, and how they figure in the final chapter.
Yes, and can I say it's incredibly satisfying. I found the ending very satisfying. So
Thank
you. If you haven't read it, this book yet, go out and please purchase one from McNally or an independent bookstore. Rachel, are there any questions that I missed, or as Leona said, I think we're maybe at time?
I think we may have had one more, and correct me if you answered this already. It was why Sylvie rather than Betty? Did we go there already?
Oh no, yes, we did. That's right. Why Sylvie rather than Betty? Pardon me. Yes.
Well, she didn't always have the name of Sylvie. And for a long time, she had a different name, and I won't tell you what that name is because it'll mess me up, and it might mess you up when you read the book. But I finally settled on Sylvie, partly just because I liked the way it scanned in different sentences, and I liked it. It seemed to me, I just liked something bright and shining about that name, and the fact that in one set of lifelines, it could be shortened to Syl. So she could actually have different names in situations. But there's no really big reason other than I just liked the sound of the name. I liked its musicality.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, again, thank you for inviting me to ask these questions and have this conversation with Leona, and for this tremendous book. It really is a joy to read, and I'm going to enjoy rereading it as well. Thank you.
Well, it's been such a pleasure talking to you, Kate. Thank you for fielding those questions and for those great questions. And before I go and hand it back to Rachel, I also want to say a big thank you to McNally Robinson for helping with this launch and for your wonderful support of the book and working hard to keep it on the shelves. And two other thank yous is it took a long time to write this book, over 10 years, and along the road I got assistance from the Saskatchewan Arts Board and the Canada Council for the Arts. So thank you very much to those funders and to everyone at Freehand Books. So thank you. Okay, Rachel.
Well, thank you so much, Leona, and a huge thanks to Kate as well. That was a lovely conversation and a really nice way to launch the book, even though we can't be together in person. Thanks to Freehand Books as well, and to Deborah Willis for the lovely introduction, and Kelsey Attard for helping with so much of the Zoom tech stuff and making sure that the book trailer worked. We look forward to when we can all gather in person again, but for now, keep an eye out for more virtual events. And again, congratulations, Leona.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening, everybody.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Later.
Thanks for coming.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.